process would complete just over 60 boxes, perhaps 60 or 61, which would be the largest number of boxes concluded in a day. So that is showing that the pace is gradually increasing, but not to a satisfactory level. Therefore, we continue to anxiously await the establishment of the additional promised stations, which we hope will bring greater expediency to the process, and also we would like to see the hours of work specified in the order be rigidly enforced and complied with, because today again ballot containers were closed at 5:30, and we believe that that is unacceptable. It's a premature closure of work, and having regard to the fact that we are developing a backlog, so to speak, when one takes into account the average of the output daily and the 25 days deadline, we are still at a backlog, and therefore steps must be taken to bring greater rapidity to the process. Region 4 in particular is agonizingly slow, and perhaps that may also be a deliberate strategy. This entire afternoon, Region 4 completed one box, one single box, from lunch to 5:30, and I believe they could have started another box at 5:30 and conclude at 7. So total today, for example, Region 4 did 4 boxes. Region 5 did 18 boxes. So clearly, a particular trend is emerging, which we hope we will have reversed at some point in time. And the strategy that appears to be emerging of delaying Region 4, we will be able to nip that in the bud soon. The other important aspect of today's work is that Region 1, the tabulation exercise was finally concluded, and the certificate which has to be issued at the end of the tabulation of a region's result was signed by all the parties, including GCOM officials, and that certificate was given to all the parties. That would constitute a declaration of the Region 1's results. So that was done, and we are happy that we were able to overcome certain hurdles that arose which delayed this process from being completed before. The other issue that I would like to speak briefly on is, you heard the President's remarks to the press. Importantly, he spoke about elections being free and orderly. He says that he's committed to this recount process, and he says that he will be bound by the declaration emanating from the process. I think he said any declaration. I can't imagine that it will be a declaration other than the process that he himself initiated. Because remember, in the CARICOM Accord, he initiated the recount process. And I mean, I don't wish to rehash the whole history of the obstacles that were sprung up, but you know them well. The population can relate to them very vividly. But now that we have reached this stage, I consider the President's remarks good in the context of binding himself to the results of the process and accepting the results of the process. One would hope that his other members of his government will now adjust their narrative to suit the parameters fixed by the president, and we will have less and less of the side shows and freak shows and pantomime that we have been having. Unless, of course, the president has given one of his placatory, sterile commitment and narrative. We are hoping that is not the position here, and that we will see now that the president has spoken an alteration of the narrative that will come from ministers of his government and members of his party. Of course, you saw the very harsh language that the president used to reprimand the Attorney General, who essentially told you yesterday that this exercise is a time-wasting one and it can produce no legal results. I saw the president was very firm in his dismissal of Basil Williams' remarks, and fittingly so. Those remarks were outrageous. So those are the few remarks I would like to make at this stage, and of course I'll invite your questions.
Mr. Nandlall, can you say or verify that the UPNUPNC signed off on the certification document version 1?
Yes, they signed off. I looked at it. I saw the person's signature. I just verified that they signed off.
Can you say who the person is?
I can't remember the person's name. I can't remember. I don't want to guess. But the person was, he signed off. I looked at it. I went to the room actually because a problem had arisen, and which my party representatives asked for my intervention. So I was in the room and he was there. The whole panel is not one, it's more than one person, and they signed on, and which is a positive development.
Just before you came out, Mr. Martin from the PNPR claimed that 45 of the Region 1 ballot boxes are directly linked to electoral fraud. Did you pick up any irregularities, or did the PDP pick up any irregularities during the recount process for District 1?
No irregularity of any substantive and substantial nature. As we said before, and we will continue to say, every elections, once you subject it to some kind of forensic or other examination, or even a recount, will reveal and produce margins of error. That is an acceptable state of affairs across the electoral globe, wherever elections are held. Guyana will be no different. So yes, you are going to have very minimal, diminished, marginal differences, and you had them in region 1. And they're going to recur, I suppose, throughout the exercise, but not of the nature, type, and magnitude that can alter the outcome of the elections. So they may have some discrepancies about 20 votes missing or something like that. That is the extent of it. I don't know what Norton is talking about, and the fact that his representatives, his party's representatives, signed on that certificate, I believe would put those allegations to rest.
You said that one box from Region 4 took an inordinate amount of time. Where was that box from, and what were the issues that were being raised?
East Bank. The box was from East Bank. In all fairness, it was a fairly large box too, but no box should take that kind of hours, 5 hours, no box. And it's because of the same narrative, the same type of objections continuing. And that's what I'm saying, that you have the president and the head of the coalition out here talking to the nation and committing to the process, and while he's doing that, and even after he has done that, his minions continue on a path that is inconsistent with what Mr. Granger has said. I am hoping that by tomorrow, directions will be given to adjust this narrative so that we can eliminate it, because it has, as we have been saying all the time, it will not materially affect the results, the counting of the ballots. And that's what is important. Norton, I understand, spoke spoke a lot about or made a big issue about absence of poll books. Now the poll books, some of the poll books, I am told, were missing at the time when that part of the region was being recounted. But the poll books were subsequently recovered. So how is there a miscarriage of justice? How is there an unfairness? And all that is contained in a poll book is an occurrence register. If anything out of the ordinary occurs, it's a place where the presiding officer can make a note. That is all. That is what it is. It's an occurrence book. How can that be elevated to the important status of affecting the results of an election? That's simply ludicrous. But as I said, the strategy is to magnify and maximize these irregularities and to make them appear as they are substantial problems and that they can possibly detract from the numbers that the ballot boxes are revealing one by one. Again today, the ballot, every one of the ballot box, 60 of them that will be completed by the end of today, all of them match the SOPs that the PPP has in its possession. All of them in a material way, one after the other. So the process is producing consistently that the ballots in the box match the SOP, and subsequently or consequently the SORs that are being produced by the process is matching the SOPs and the number of ballots.
Mr. Nandlall, did the PPP for this March 2nd election illegally pay anyone to vote in the party's favor?
Certainly not.
We have Aubrey Norton saying that the party is in possession of signed affidavits from persons claiming that your party paid them to vote in its favor. Could you respond to that?
Aubrey Norton is a known political hack. You would have information like that and you're keeping it at Congress Place? This is the kind of insane utterances that they come and they make to the people of this country, and they expect people to respect them at the end of the process. Rather than talk about PPP affidavits from PPP, let him produce the statements of poll that they're claiming they win the elections by. And unless they do that and answer you properly, don't entertain the questions.
Okay.
That should be a good policy. They come here and talk foolishness.
Right. The APNU-AFC is claiming that for Region 1, there were a total of 120 ballots that belong to the coalition that were found in the PPP pile. Can you attest to...
And that was discovered where? In this process?
during the count, the Region 1 count?
But why did their officer in the tabulation center sign on to the results? You see, the same thing is happening. Their polling agents on elections day sign on to the statements of poll. Now their officers in the tabulation center are signing on. And you still have a growing commentary outside of that?
Well, Mr. Norton had said that they would not sign off on anything, but then we saw a document showing that somebody did sign off on anything.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I keep saying that they can't get their act together. Even that, they're incompetent to do.
But does signing on mean that you agree with it?
Well, what does it mean, sir?
Can you just sign on and also include in the observation?
There is nothing in the certificate has no place for anything else other than the signature and the figures that it contains. And one signs on to a document because one accepts it. Now, not because you have not signed on, it means that the absence of your signature can affect the validity of the document. That also can't happen, because you can't unreasonably refuse to sign and then claim the document is invalid. Is that if you have a court matter going on you choose to absent yourself from the court hearings and you expect that the court can proceed. The law doesn't function like that. The law allows the court to proceed ex parte in your absence. Meaning that you can't, one person will never have the power in law who has a partisan interest. One person who has a partisan interest will never have the power in law to refuse to sign so as to render the document invalid. The law will never countenance that.
Would you say, in your view as a lawyer, that the effect that the certification of the Region 1 vote had is to replace the declaration for Region 1?
Well, that is the whole purpose of the exercise. That these declarations, one by one, what will prevail in the end. And that is what will be totaled by the Chief Elections Officer and placed in a report and present to the Commission. And that is what the President, I understand, bind himself to, and that is why he rejected what Basil Williams was saying.
Is your understanding that the old declaration for Region 1 is still held in abeyance?
Well, the Commission, I think, made that decision, and at the appropriate time, I suppose, the abeyance will be lifted and it will be destroyed,
And your view is that
and it will be overcome and overtaken by the new certificate that the process is producing, region by region.
What's going to happen going forward if the coalition refuses to sign that certification document for the other regions? What can happen there? Is that going to meet a delay in a declaration?
It should not. That's what I'm saying. One party who has a partisan interest and and when the outcome is not favoring that party will never have the authority in law to refuse to sign the process because he or she is dissatisfied with the results of the process. The law will never countenance such a morbid and sordid state of affairs.
Other than District 4, has the PP found irregularities in the other districts during the recount?
Not of any material type. That's what I'm saying. As I said, you are going to have margin of errors which the process will produce. Any process, especially an election process. Yesterday, I made reference to a Stabrook News editorial, beautifully written, that made that point in a very, very fundamental way about margin of errors being committed by elections. But importantly, they will not either singularly or in an aggregate way affect the eventual outcome of the elections. If that happens, then you have a problem. But that is not what is being shown here. The ballots are matching the statements of poll, consequently producing a statement of recount that also is matching the statement of poll.
Does it concern you that the coalition has said that there's been a substantial amount of ballots that were not stamped with a 6-digit stamp? One case cited is at Samata Point, and these included about 8 to 1% of the ballots from the disciplined forces.
How many ballots were affected?
I'm not aware of that number.
Right, so they're not telling you. When they say 81%, the box can have maybe 80 votes.
But any ballot.
And yes, any ballot, that should not happen. It should not happen. But as I said, these margin of errors are going to be revealed. But do they aggregate and concatenate to a level that will materially affect the total output?
So when does it concern you? When at what number?
Of course, look, every single error concerns me. But the PPP can't be burdened. The PPP didn't run these elections. When Miss Myers and Lowenfield and Claudette Singh and Ben and Alexander and Conrad, they come out here, ask them how that happened. They took $8 billion of taxpayers' dollars to run an election. They are independent. They had exclusive management and conduct of the elections. The PPP can be made a scapegoat for errors committed on elections day. What the PPP will say, that an aggregate of those irregularities, whatever they are, will not materially affect the fact that the PPP won these elections by over 15,000 votes.
But doesn't that affect the credibility of the elections if you're seeing 1,000
My
votes,
friend,
for example,
my friend,
not being stamped?
my friend, these elections were observed by the Carter Center, by the Commonwealth Observer Team, by CARICOM Observer Team, by a United Nations Observer Team, a team from the OAS, the Private Sector Observer Team, AmCham, the Guyana Bar Association, the Guyana Labour Movement, and a whole host of religious organizations. Every single one of them, having observed the elections in an impartial and non-participatory way, and without a vested interest in the outcome of the elections, pronounced in their respective reports and public statements that these elections were free, fair, transparent, and done in accordance with acceptable democratic norms and tradition. So my view and the PPP view doesn't really matter. The government themselves proclaimed that they won the elections. The president has repeatedly said, up to the 4th of May, in a public statement, I quote, "Election day's activities were free, fair, and orderly." Free, meaning free of violence, I suppose. Fair, meaning devoid of fraud. And orderly, meaning absence of public confusion and public disorder. And that is the status of the elections. The only thing that went wrong with the elections is when Mingo attempted to steal in Ashmin's building and then at High Street, Kingston. That is the only wrong committed in the electoral process of substance.
If I could just deliver for you the general allegation that's being made by the coalition. Well, you accept that there are some small errors. What they're saying is that these errors are predominantly concentrated in coalition strongholds and that they are part of an elaborate scheme by the PPP to defraud the party of their rightfully gained votes.
And we reject that as utter, unadulterated foolishness. And I have neither the energy nor the time to keep answering those ridiculous allegations. Let them continue singing that song. Their leader came here and told you a different story.
Thank you.
You're welcome.